The ship Tempest drifted through the cold, endless void of space. Its hull bore the scars of countless battles, each one a silent reminder of humanity's long struggle to survive in a galaxy filled with threats. Captain Elias Graves stood on the command deck, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes locked on the massive, swirling planet ahead. It was marked on every galactic map as forbidden. No one entered. No one left. No signals. No records. Just silence. And yet here they were. "Sir, we are approaching the planet's outer atmosphere," reported Ensign Vega, her voice steady but tense. She had seen many dangerous missions before, but this one felt different. There was something wrong about this place. "Keep shields at full power," Elias ordered. His voice carried the weight of experience, a tone that kept the crew steady even in the face of fear. The command deck was quiet, filled only with the soft hum of machines and the occasional beeping of sensors. Every crew member knew the risk. No one had ever returned from this planet. Stories of its horrors spread like wildfire through the fleet. Some called it cursed. Others believed ancient weapons still guarded its surface. Whatever the truth was, the Tempest had been ordered to investigate. Lieutenant Harris, the ship's tactical officer, frowned as he checked his console. Still no readings, no life, no transmissions, nothing. "But our sensors are acting strange." Elias narrowed his eyes. "Define strange." Harris tapped a few buttons, his brow furrowed. "It's like something is jamming us. I can't get an accurate reading on the surface. It's there one moment, gone the next." Elias exhaled slowly. That wasn't good. The planet itself was a haunting sight. Its surface was shrouded in thick clouds, shifting and swirling like a living thing. Sharp, jagged formations occasionally peeked through the mist, casting eerie shadows. Deep craters, unnatural in shape, pockmarked the land like scars. "This place gives me a bad feeling," Vega muttered. "You're not alone," Harris said grimly. But orders were orders. The Tempest began its descent. The moment they entered the atmosphere, everything went wrong. The ship lurched violently. Massive turbulence. Vega shouted as warning lights flashed across the control panels. "Compensate," Elias barked. The hull groaned under the strain. Winds howled like banshees, slamming into the ship with unnatural force. The sensors flickered, altitude readings shifting wildly. "Sir, this storm, it's not natural." Before Elias could respond, the ship dropped. For a terrifying moment, gravity vanished, and then, boom. The Tempest slammed through the last layer of clouds. The turbulence stopped instantly, as if someone had flipped a switch. The crew gasped at what lay before them. A massive city stretched across the landscape, its buildings shattered, its towers broken and crumbling. The streets were covered in a thick layer of ash, untouched for centuries. But the worst part wasn't the ruins. It was the bodies, frozen figures, scattered across the city as if time had simply stopped. They stood in place, some mid-step, some reaching toward the sky, others locked in expressions of pure terror. "God help us," whispered Harris. "What happened here?" Elias said nothing. His gut told him to turn back. Every instinct screamed at him that this place was wrong. But it was too late. They were already here. "Prepare for landing," Elias commanded. The Tempest touched down near the city's outskirts. As the ramp lowered, cold air rushed inside, a stillness that felt suffocating. Elias led the team out, their boots crunching against the dust of a forgotten world. The silence was unnatural. No wind, no movement. Then, in the distance, something shifted. A shadow moved between the ruins. The crew of the Tempest stood in eerie silence, their breath fogging in the cold air. The ruins stretched endlessly around them, broken towers looming like skeletal remains of a long-dead civilization. The ash-covered streets were littered with statues. No, not statues. Bodies. Frozen figures locked in their last moments of life. Captain Elias Graves moved carefully, his boots kicking up fine dust that had not been disturbed for centuries. The stillness of the place was unnatural, like time itself had been stopped by an unseen force. Lieutenant Harris kept his rifle ready, scanning the surroundings. "I don't like this, Captain. Feels like we're being watched." "You're just imagining things," muttered Ensign Vega, though her voice lacked confidence. She clutched her scanner tightly, but the readings were erratic, flickering between static and nonsense data. Elias raised a fist, signaling the team to halt. He turned toward the frozen figures. Their faces were twisted in fear, mouths open as if they had screamed in their final moments. The eerie part was their eyes. Though covered in dust, they still glistened, wet, alive, as if whatever had happened to them had only occurred seconds ago. A chill crawled up his spine. "Keep moving," he ordered. "We need to find the source of that interference." The team pressed forward, moving through the ruins cautiously. The buildings around them were massive, their architecture unlike anything recorded in human history. Intricate carvings lined the walls, symbols and glyphs that seemed to shift when viewed from different angles. Vega stopped suddenly. "Captain, look at this." She pointed to a large structure ahead. It resembled a temple, its entrance partially buried under rubble. The doorway was enormous, but what caught their attention was the inscription above it. Unlike the rest of the alien symbols, this one was written in perfect English. It read, "Turn back." The words sent a shiver through the team. "How the hell?" Harris whispered. "That doesn't make sense. No human has ever been here before." Elias clenched his jaw. "Someone, or something, wanted us to see this." A sudden crackling noise echoed from their communicators. A voice, garbled and broken, whispered through the static. "Why did you come here?" The team froze. Vega frantically checked her scanner. "That transmission. It's coming from inside the temple." Elias took a deep breath. Every part of him told him to turn back, to leave this cursed place. But orders were orders. They had come here for answers. And now, the planet was speaking to them. "Form up," he said grimly. "We're going in." With weapons raised and flashlights cutting through the darkness, the team stepped into the unknown. And behind them, in the ruins, the frozen figures moved. The temple's entrance loomed over the team like a gaping maw, its cracked stone walls covered in strange, shifting symbols. The warning above, "Turn back," still burned in their minds, but it was already too late. The moment they stepped inside, the silence of the ruins seemed to press against them, thick and suffocating. The interior was massive, stretching into darkness. The air was cold and stale, yet something about it felt alive, as if the temple itself was watching them. "Lights on," Captain Elias ordered. The team activated their shoulder lamps, beams of white cutting through the gloom. The floor was smooth, polished stone, untouched by time. Massive pillars lined the hall, each one carved with unfamiliar symbols. Unlike the chaotic ruins outside, this place was intact, preserved. "Someone's been here recently," muttered Lieutenant Harris. He ran a gloved hand along the wall, frowning. No dust. Ensign Vega checked her scanner, still getting interference. But that transmission, it's coming from deeper inside. Elias nodded. "Stay alert. Move out." The team advanced cautiously. Every footstep echoed through the vast chamber. The deeper they went, the stronger the sense of wrongness became. Then the lights flickered. A cold whisper slithered through the air. "You should not be here." Vega gasped, spinning around. "Did you hear that?" Harris tightened his grip on his rifle. "Yeah, and I don't think we're alone." Elias raised a fist, signaling them to stop. He scanned the darkness ahead, his instincts screaming at him. Something was waiting for them. At the far end of the chamber, a massive stone doorway stood slightly ajar. Beyond it, a faint blue glow pulsed like a dying heartbeat. "That's our source," Elias said. Let's move. The team approached slowly. The symbols on the walls seemed to shift as they passed, twisting into new shapes. Watching. Then Vega gasped. "Captain, look!" She pointed to the floor near the entrance. Scattered across the stone were dozens of footprints. Not alien. Human. Some were fresh, others were old. "How is that possible?" Harris whispered. Elias stared at the tracks, his mind racing. If humans had been here before, why wasn't there any record of it? Before he could answer, the temple shook. A deep, rumbling sound echoed from the depths. The doorway ahead slammed open. A gust of freezing air blasted through, carrying with it the sound of something moving. Something huge. And then, from the darkness beyond, a voice rang out. "You are not the first." Asterisk. The lights flickered again, and the temple swallowed them whole. The moment the doorway slammed open, everything changed. The air turned heavy, pressing against the team's chests as if unseen hands were gripping them. Their lights flickered, casting long, shifting shadows across the temple's walls. Captain Elias clenched his jaw. "Weapons up. Stay together." Lieutenant Harris didn't need the order. His rifle was already raised, his finger hovering over the trigger. Vega gripped her scanner tightly. Though the screen was nothing but static now, the interference was overwhelming. The voice that had spoken, "You are not the first," echoed in their minds, but no one had seen who or what had said it. Beyond the doorway, the blue glow pulsed steadily. The chamber ahead was massive, its walls lined with more carvings. Only these were different. Unlike the shifting symbols outside, these depicted images. Elias stepped closer, his flashlight sweeping across the carvings. The first image showed a towering figure, arms raised toward the sky. It was surrounded by kneeling beings, aliens of various shapes and sizes. A god, a ruler. The second image was darker. The same figure stood alone, the kneeling ones now fleeing. The third was the worst. The figure stood in a field of stone-like bodies, frozen, unmoving. Vega swallowed hard. This looks exactly like what we saw outside." Elias nodded grimly. "Whatever happened to them? It started here." Harris turned, scanning the shadows beyond. "That doesn't explain the voice we heard." Then the sound came again. A low, guttural whisper. "Turn. Back." The walls trembled. The air grew colder. And then they saw it. From the far end of the chamber, something began to move. The blue glow pulsed brighter, revealing a towering silhouette. It was human-shaped, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its head slightly tilted as if it were studying them. Its skin was dark as shadow, blending into the temple's gloom. And its eyes, deep, empty voids, locked onto them. Elias felt his breath hitch. "Hold your fire." Harris's grip on his rifle tightened. "Captain." The figure took a step forward. The temperature plunged. Their breath misted in the air. Then it spoke. "You should not have come." The voice wasn't hostile. It was filled with something far worse. Regret. The lights flickered. The figure vanished. A heartbeat later, the temple screamed. A deafening, otherworldly wail filled the air. The walls shook violently, sending dust and debris raining down. Elias shouted, "Move! Get out of here! Now!" The team turned to run. But the doorway was gone. A solid wall of smooth, unbroken stone stood where the exit had been. Trapped. Vega's voice cracked with panic. "Captain, what do we do?" Elias forced himself to think. There had to be a way out. Then, deep within the chamber, something clicked. The blue glow pulsed again, brighter than ever. And then, the whispers began. Many voices, soft at first, then louder. They came from everywhere. "They came before you. They did not listen. They are still here." The team turned, and the frozen figures in the carvings were no longer just carvings. The whispers filled the chamber, circling the team like unseen specters. The air felt thick, pressing against their chests, making it hard to breathe. The eerie blue glow flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. Captain Elias clenched his fists. They were trapped. No exit. No clear enemy. Just voices. Too many voices. Lieutenant Harris backed toward the center of the room, rifle raised. "Captain, we need a plan. Now." Ensign Vega was frantically scanning the walls, her hands shaking. I don't understand. The structure, it's shifting. The readings don't make sense." Elias forced himself to think. They couldn't panic. Not yet. Everyone, stay together. No sudden movements. The carvings on the walls, they were watching them. The frozen figures had changed. Their stone-like faces were now twisted in expressions of pure agony. And then, one of them moved. Harris sucked in a sharp breath as he saw it. A figure that had been part of the wall just seconds ago was now standing in the center of the chamber. A humanoid shape, skin cracked like ancient stone. Its eyes were hollow pits of darkness. It raised its arm toward them, fingers curled, twitching. And then it screamed. The sound wasn't human. It wasn't anything Elias had ever heard before. It wasn't just a sound. It burrowed into their minds, clawing at their thoughts. The pressure in the air became unbearable, like 1,000 unseen hands pulling them apart. Vega fell to her knees, clutching her head. "Make it stop. Make it stop." Harris fired. The gunshot echoed like thunder, the bullet striking the creature's chest. But the thing didn't even flinch. Instead, it twisted. Its body jerked unnaturally, its limbs bending in impossible angles. Then, it started walking toward them, slow, deliberate, relentless. Elias grabbed Vega, pulling her to her feet. "Move, get behind me." More figures began peeling off the walls. Their bodies cracked and shifted, ancient stone turning to something not alive, but not dead either. The whispers grew louder, filling their minds, invading their thoughts. "You should not have come." They did not listen. "You will not listen. You will become us." Elias gritted his teeth, forcing himself to focus. No exit. The doorway had sealed itself. There had to be another way out. His eyes locked onto the center of the chamber. The blue glow, it was pulsing from something. A pedestal. And on it, a small floating cube. The carvings around it showed figures kneeling before it, worshiping, or begging. "Vega." Elias shouted. "What is that thing?" Vega wiped the sweat from her face, forcing herself to look at her scanner. I don't know. The energy readings are off the charts. It's alive." Elias took a step forward. The moment he did, every moving figure in the room froze. Their hollow eyes turned toward him. Harris hissed, "Captain, what the hell are you doing?" Elias ignored him. He could feel the cube. It was radiating something that made his skin crawl. But it was also the only thing in this room that wasn't trying to kill them. The whispers became a chorus now, overlapping voices speaking in 100 different languages, some ancient, some unknown, some eerily human. And then one voice, clearer than the others, cut through the chaos. "Take it, or join them." Elias made his decision. He lunged forward and grabbed the cube. The second his fingers touched it, a shockwave ripped through the chamber. The blue glow exploded into blinding white light. The figures let out an ear-piercing shriek as the room collapsed in on itself. And then, everything went black. When Elias opened his eyes, he was somewhere else. The cold stone of the temple was gone. The ruins, the figures, everything had vanished. He was standing in a vast, endless void. A sky filled with swirling stars stretched above him. Beneath his feet, the ground was smooth white marble. And in front of him, a man. No, not a man. The figure was tall, draped in dark robes that shifted like smoke. His face was hidden, but his presence was overwhelming. "You have touched the artifact," the figure said. Its voice was deep, ancient, carrying the weight of 1,000 years. Elias tightened his grip on the cube. "Who are you?" The figure took a slow step forward. "The last of those who came before. And if you do not listen," the stars above them darkened, "you will share our fate." Elias felt the void tremble beneath his feet. He wasn't just holding an object. He was holding a curse. And now, it was inside him. Elias stood frozen in the endless void, gripping the cube so tightly his knuckles turned white. The dark-robed figure before him radiated something ancient, something beyond human understanding. The weight of 1,000 voices filled the air, pressing down on him like an invisible force. "You are holding what remains of our knowledge," the figure said, its voice smooth but heavy, like distant thunder. "But it is also our prison." Elias forced himself to steady his breath. "What are you talking about?" The figure tilted its head slightly, as if studying him. "You have seen the temple, the ruins, the frozen ones. They were not statues. They were like you once. Explorers, conquerors, seekers of power. Now, they are trapped." Elias felt his stomach drop. The horrifying carvings, the shifting figures, the whispers in the dark. "They're alive." The figure gave a slow nod. "They are not dead, but they are no longer themselves." Elias clenched his jaw. Then what happened to them? The void around them seemed to shudder, as if something vast and unseen was moving through the darkness. The robed figure raised a hand, and the stars above flickered, then changed. A vision unfolded before Elias. A grand civilization, towering cities of light and glass. Beings of all shapes and forms working together, expanding their knowledge, reaching into the depths of the unknown. Then, the cube. It had been uncovered in an excavation, just like Elias had done. Scientists studied it. Leaders debated over its power. Some feared it. Others worshipped it. And then, the hunger began. The people changed, not in body, but in mind. Their thoughts became not their own. Their voices turned into whispers. Their cities hollowed out as if something had consumed them from the inside. Until, one by one, they froze. Elias's breath came in sharp gasps as he watched an entire world become a silent graveyard. The vision faded, and he was back in the void, the robed figure watching him. Elias swallowed hard. "You're telling me that's what happened to them?" The figure nodded. "And now it has begun within you." Elias stiffened. A cold weight settled into his chest. His fingers tingled. His mind felt crowded. Thoughts that weren't his own brushed against the edges of his consciousness. The whispers, they were no longer coming from outside. They were inside him. Elias gritted his teeth. "Tell me how to stop this." The figure took a slow step closer. "There is only one way. The cube must return to where it was taken. If it leaves this place, the infection will spread." Elias felt a pulse of fear. If he took the cube back to the surface, if he left with it, would the entire galaxy suffer the same fate? A sudden sharp pain lanced through his skull. The whispers inside him grew louder. "Join us. Become one. It is already too late." Elias gritted his teeth, clutching his head. The void around him darkened. The robed figure's voice became distant, fading under the storm of voices rising in his mind. Then, a hand grabbed his arm. Not the figure's, a real hand. "Captain, wake up." Elias gasped, his eyes snapping open. He was back in the temple. The cube was still in his hands, its glow flickering wildly. The walls trembled, the stone cracking apart as the temple collapsed around them. Harris was gripping his shoulder, shaking him. "Captain, we need to go. The whole damn place is coming down." Vega was beside them, her face pale. "You were gone, sir. You just froze. You weren't breathing." Elias felt his heart hammering in his chest. The whispers still lingered in his mind, but they were fainter now, like echoes. He looked down at the cube. It no longer pulsed steadily. Its glow flickered erratically, like something inside it was dying or awakening. The temple shuddered violently. Massive chunks of stone fell from the ceiling. "Move ye!" Elias roared. The team sprinted toward the only exit left, a crumbling tunnel barely holding together. They dodged falling debris, the walls closing in as the structure collapsed behind them. The whispers screamed in his head, furious, desperate. "Do not leave. You are ours. We are not finished." Elias ignored them. He ran. The tunnel shook violently. Dust and stone rained down. Vega yelped as she tripped, but Harris grabbed her, hauling her back to her feet. The exit was in sight, a faint shimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. One last push. The team burst out into the open just as the temple caved in completely. A massive cloud of dust erupted into the sky, blocking out the alien sun. For a long moment, no one spoke. They had made it, but something was wrong. Elias still felt the weight in his mind. He still felt the cube pulsing in his hands. The whispers had not stopped. They had only changed. No longer pleading. No longer warning. Now, they were waiting. Elias stood at the edge of the ruins, gripping the cube like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. Behind him, the rest of the team coughed and stumbled, brushing dust and debris off their gear. The temple, the ancient prison, was gone, buried beneath tons of stone. But the whispers remained. They no longer screamed, no longer pleaded. They had changed. Now, they were quiet, patient. Elias pressed a shaking hand to his temple. The alien voices echoed inside his skull, but they didn't overwhelm him. They whispered like the wind, just beyond the edge of hearing. Watching, waiting. "Captain," Harris's voice pulled him back. Elias turned, forcing himself to focus. His team looked shaken but alive. Vega wiped blood from a small cut on her forehead. Harris kept glancing at the cube in Elias's hands, his usual easy confidence replaced by something close to fear. "We need to move," Vega said, checking the scanner on her wrist. That cave-in triggered something below. "I'm reading unstable seismic activity. If we stay here, we might be swallowed up next." Elias nodded automatically, but his mind was elsewhere. The figure in the void, the warnings, the frozen explorers, the infection. He still felt it. Inside him. He tightened his grip on the cube. "We're heading back to the ship. Now." Harris and Vega exchanged glances but didn't argue. They had all seen too much, and the instinct for survival outweighed curiosity. They moved fast, retracing their path through the ruins, past shattered pillars and fallen statues. The jungle beyond was eerily silent. The alien sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the dead world. Every step Elias took felt heavier. The weight in his mind grew. The whispers, though faint, felt more present. They weren't just speaking to him. They were listening to his thoughts, testing him, judging. By the time they reached the clearing where their shuttle was docked, his breath was shallow, his pulse erratic. His body felt wrong, like something was shifting inside his skin. He clenched his fists, hold it together. Vega ran ahead, unlocking the ship's ramp. Harris was right behind her, glancing nervously at the sky. Then Elias heard it, a sound from the jungle behind them. Not a whisper, not a hallucination, something real. His head snapped around. The trees were moving. At first, he thought it was just the wind, but no. The branches twisted, the leaves curled. The jungle wasn't just swaying, it was reacting. Something else was here. Harris cursed. "What the hell is?" A shadow shifted between the trees. Then another. And another. They weren't alone. Elias's instincts screamed at him to run, but his body refused. He stood frozen, his heart hammering. He couldn't see details, just shapes, figures moving in the darkness. And then, One of them stepped into the light. It was human, or at least, it used to be. The figure wore a decayed spacesuit, its insignia faded beyond recognition. Its helmet was cracked, revealing a face frozen in horror. Skin stretched too tightly over bone. Lips curled back in a silent scream. But the worst part, its eyes. They were alive, not glowing, not alien, just watching. Elias felt ice crawl down his spine. Then the thing moved. Its joints cracked, unnatural, and stiff, as it took a single step forward. Behind it, more emerged from the jungle, dozens of them. Some in tattered uniforms, others in alien armor, their bodies in various states of decay. The lost explorers. The ones who had come before. The ones the whispers had taken. Harris stumbled backward, fumbling for his weapon. Vega was already halfway up the ramp, shouting something Elias couldn't hear over the pounding in his skull. The whispers surged, flooding his mind in a single command. Stay. Elias staggered, his grip on the cube weakened. The frozen ones took another step forward. The ship's engines roared to life behind him. Vega was screaming at him now, but her voice was distant, like she was calling from across an ocean. The cube pulsed in his hands. We are not done with you. Elias forced himself to move. With a final surge of will, he tore his gaze away from the frozen ones and sprinted up the ramp. Harris was right behind him, slamming the hatch shut just as the first of the creatures lunged forward. The ship lurched as Vega launched it skyward. The engines flared, shaking the hull as they broke through the planet's atmosphere. Elias collapsed into his seat, his breath ragged. Harris stared at him, eyes wide. What the hell were those things? Elias didn't answer. He couldn't, because he already knew the truth. They weren't just creatures. They weren't just infected. They were waiting. And now so was he. The whispers had stopped, but something deep inside him told him they hadn't left. They were just silent. For now. And the worst part, he wasn't sure if he had escaped, or if he had just brought them with him.